from your audience. Today we're going to look at figurative language and then figurative language within a poem. And then you'll get to do a few things with that. I know you said you did a lot with this in 7th grade. However, many of you are not writing with figurative language in your writing. And certainly I would think with a poem there should be some sort of non-literal, some sort of figurative language happening. First, we're going to have you do this. For 2 minutes, I want you just to, you can either write down the definition or talk out a definition, but try and define simile, metaphor, personification, hyperbole, and onomatopoeia. And if you're feeling like a boss today, maybe you can come up with an example of some of those. I'm going to put 2 minutes on the clock, and so you have 2 minutes to do those. Again, you can write it out or talk it out. I'll give you that choice, but try and define those three. And if you can't define them, or try and define them, and if you want to take it a step further, go ahead and create some examples. 2 minutes starts now. Go for it. All right, about 15 more seconds, so wind your ideas down and start to wind your conversations down. All right, so hopefully you kind of have a definition for each of those, either in your head or you wrote it down, and maybe some of you even have some examples. So let's take a look at each of those individually. These are your learning targets, so you're going to be able to define simile, metaphor, onomatopoeia, hyperbole, and personification. Many of you can probably already do that. You're also going to be able to identify them in a poem, and today that poem is going to be For My Father. Finally, you'll be connecting Janice Mirikatani's background. She is the poet that wrote For My Father. We're going to look at her background and how can you connect her background with her art, which is her poem, to gain perspective. And that's what we'll be doing today. All right, so a simile, that's one that I feel like everybody seems to use. It's kind of the default. It's comparing two unlike things using like or as. T. Swizzle or Taylor Swift said, your voice like nails on a chalkboard. Iggy Azalea, kind of an old reference, but Gonna Love You Like a Black Widow Baby would also be comparing love to Black Widow, meaning maybe you don't want this person's love. You do need to be careful with similes because they often turn out to be cliche. A cliche is an overused term or phrase, and you want to get rid of those because they've been used so much they've almost lost their meaning, and you want your writing to be authentic and original. So a lot of times the ones that have to do with animals end up as cliches, like fast as a cheetah, strong as an ox, quiet as a mouse, big as an elephant. Those are all things that other people have thought of, so you want to come up with ones that are original. Same with like fast as lightning. That's one that clearly has been overused, and you want to come up with something that's original when you come up with your cliche. I'm not going to have you think of a cliche right now. You know what? Do it. Go ahead and take 30 seconds and come up with a cliche with your elbow partner. What's something that's overused? And it could be an example of a simile that's cliche. Go for it. All right. Hopefully you came up with some cool ideas. Again, those are ones you want to avoid. All right, metaphor. These are amazing. They're just like similes, but it's without using like or as. For some reason, I can't get students to use this as much. I think it's because when you say like or as, you signal in your brain like, I don't really mean this. But when you say something is something else, then you get scared because you think, oh man, they think I'm really saying this is this, even though it's not meant to be taken literally. So my heart's a stereo, that lyric from Maroon 5, I think, would definitely be a metaphor. He could turn into a simile by saying my heart is like a stereo, but I really like the idea of my heart is a stereo, being okay with taking that leap to get rid of that like or that as. Baby, you're a firework would be Katy Perry, or baby, you're like a firework would be a simile. My mind is an ocean, or my mind is like an ocean would be a simile. All right, hyperbole. These are statements that are exaggerated so much they're not meant to be taken literally. Like, I've told you a million times, clean up your room. I doubt they've told you a million times. I don't think you've been alive that long. But it's certainly hyperbolic, something that is exaggerated. But be careful because it's also cliche. I've told you a million times has been used over and over and over, so it's another example of that overused phrase. The moment dragged on for hours. Again, that moment probably wasn't dragging for hours. It's exaggerated. But again, here's some cliches. So hungry I could eat an elephant. Again, that's probably overused. Or blind as a bat. That's a cliche. It's a simile and a hyperbole, but it's definitely cliche. It's overused. Personification. That's when you give human qualities to something that isn't human. If you read Time Flies, which was my scary short story, I personified the clock. I gave the clock on the wall and the grandfather clock human qualities. The wind greeted me with a kiss, or my guilt slapped me in the face, or because I get 1,000 hugs from 10 million lightning bugs. All of those are giving human characteristics either to the wind or to guilt or to a lightning bug, and those lightning bugs or guilt or wind obviously can't feel like a human feels or act like a human. Some ways I personified that evil clock in Time Flies, it was narrating, it was speaking, it had thoughts and feelings. So how could you personify this tree? What traits would you give this tree? I'm going to give one and you can't steal it. So the leaves danced in the wind. The leaves can't dance, right? Go ahead and come up with your own example. How could you personify this tree? Go for 30 seconds and share with the person next to you. Start to wind those ideas down. All right, and hopefully you got a couple cool examples of ways you might give human traits to this tree to make a poem more interesting. All right, onomatopoeia, that's one that I feel like everyone gets. Maybe not how to spell it, but they definitely understand what it is. Basically, you're doing sound words. Swoosh, sizzle, crack, smack. It can even be made up words. Like, it doesn't have to be a real word, it's just a sound. So just keep that in mind. This is one I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on because you get this one. I could be like, what sounds are going on here? You might hear the crunching of the leaves or the howling or the wind rustling through the tree branches. You might hear some sort of crack of the tree branch or the roar or the howl of the bear. So lots of different sounds could be happening here. We're going to take a look at the poem For My Father. It's by Janice Mirikatani. We're going to take a look at the poet because one of our learning targets is being able to take the background of the poet and use that to help analyze the figurative language that she uses. So she's the daughter of Japanese immigrants. Her parents were born in Japan. They moved here before she was born, and then she was born in America in 1941. So right around World War II. During that time, Pearl Harbor happened, so the bombing of Pearl Harbor by Japan. And during that time, we decided as a government, we can't trust Japanese Americans because what if they're spies? So we gathered up all the Japanese Americans in America and put them into internment camps. So it's kind of a really dark part of American history where we were doing some pretty messed up things during World War II as well, where we were splitting up families, putting people into these camps without, they didn't have a choice. They had to go. They had to leave their jobs, leave their homes, and move to these camps. So we're going to consider the poet's background when interpreting this poem For My Father, because I think her history as an immigrant and the time of year it's happening And the idea with World War II is going to pop up in the poem a little bit. All right, so I'm going to read this poem for you, and then we are going to interpret some of the specific figurative language. So as we're reading this poem, just be thinking, okay, how am I connecting to this? What figurative language are you seeing? And then we'll go ahead and share those out, and we'll interpret some lines. All right, it's called For My Father. He came over the ocean, carrying Mount Fuji on his back, Tule Lake on his chest, hacked through the brush of deserts and made them grow strawberries. We stole berries from the stem. We could not afford them for breakfast. His eyes held nothing as he whipped us for stealing. The desert had dried his soul. Wordless, he sold the rich, full berries to Hakujeans whose children pointed at our eyes. They ate fresh strawberries with cream. Father, I wanted to scream at your silence. Your strength was a stranger I could never touch. Iron in your eyes, to shield the pain, to shield desert-like wind from patches of strawberries grown from tears. All right, so again, that was by Janice Mirikitani, and we're going to take a look at how can we interpret some of this figurative language. So let's take a look at some of those specific lines that she used. Okay. Oh, and some things I did want to show you were that Hakujin, that would be a Japanese word for white people. So the white people whose children pointed at our eyes. So we'd have to think what's going on there. For me, I think about stereotypically Asian Americans have thinner eyes. And so she might be saying that these white kids were pointing at her eyes and discriminated against her and her family because they looked different than the white people that they were selling the strawberries to, is kind of how I interpret that line. So let's go ahead and take a look. He came over the ocean carrying Mount Fuji on his back, Tule Lake on his chest. Okay, and anytime you see one of these slashes, that just means there was a line break. Different poems have different line breaks that can change the meaning. And so whenever you quote a poem, you want to put that slash in there to show where the author decided to have that line break. Things that are going to help you interpret this. Mount Fuji is a mountain in Japan. I believe it's the largest mountain in Japan, but I'm not sure. Tule Lake was a Japanese internment camp, so we spoke about those. That's where we put Japanese Americans that had done nothing wrong. Their families were put into these camps, taken from their homes, taken from their jobs, put into camps because we were afraid they would be spies. So what is your interpretation? Oh, first of all, what type of figurative language is this? So is this simile, metaphor, onomatopoeia, personification, hyperbole? What are we thinking is happening there? So turn to the person next to you. What type of figurative language is this? So hopefully you were able to tell that person that this is kind of maybe a combination of things. He was carrying Mount Fuji on his back, Tule Lake on his chest. So I'd say to be able to physically carry a mountain, that would be hyperbole. There's no way someone can pick up a mountain and carry it. And then he's also carrying Tule Lake on his chest. So there's something about that internment camp being carried on his chest. So knowing that he's carrying this mountain, and he also has this chest in front of him on from Tule Lake, this internment camp. What is your interpretation of that line, and what does that line mean? Go ahead and turn to your elbow partner, to the people you're working with. I'm going to give you a minute to talk. What the heck is going on with this line? Have a conversation. All right, start to wind your ideas down. All right, and I hope you got to share some really good ideas. I'm going to share my ideas. I want to be really clear that I don't have like answers here. I've never met Janice. This is just my interpretation. My interpretation is no better than yours. Well, when it says he, they must be talking about the dad, the father. And he came over the ocean. I think that he's immigrating from Japan to America. So he came over the ocean and he was carrying Mount Fuji. Obviously, he's not literally carrying a mountain, but I think his culture is a burden that he has to carry. It's weighing him down in this new country. And that's on his back. So that's behind him. In front of him, in this new land that's supposed to be freedom and opportunity, what's in front of him on his chest? Well, it's Tule Lake. He's going to be taken to an internment camp. in this, and his freedom's going to be taken away from him in a place where he was told he would be free. And so those are some things that I interpreted from that. Again, my interpretation is no better than yours, just some ideas that I had. Let's take a look at another line. His eyes held nothing as he whipped us for stealing. His eyes held nothing as he whipped us for stealing. Turn to the person next to you. Simile, hyperbole, metaphor, onomatopoeia. What the heck's going on here? What type of figurative language? All right, wrap that up. And I think, and I don't have answers for you, but I feel like it's got to be personification because eyes can't hold anything. But she is saying his eyes held nothing. So of course our eyes can't hold anything, but she's also implying that eyes can hold something, but his don't hold anything. So I do think it is personification. Go ahead and turn to the person next to you. Do your interpretation of this line, and what the heck does it mean? All right, start to wind your ideas down. Okay. And again, here's my interpretation. I want to be real clear. I don't have answers, so this is just what I thought. My answers are no better than yours. So his eyes, so again, it's the father's eyes, and they held nothing as he whipped us for stealing. So I know from those lines before and after that that they couldn't afford the strawberries that the father grew, but they must have been caught stealing the berries because they wanted to try them. And his eyes held nothing as he beat them for stealing those berries. So I think it's just a really interesting way of saying he was emotionless. So instead of saying he was emotionless, his eyes held nothing, I think really gets that a point across with you get that cool imagery and that interesting hyperbole to kind of come to that realization on your own. All right, well, try one more. Your strength was a stranger I could never touch. So, what type of figurative language is this? Your strength was a stranger I could never touch. Simile, hyperbole, metaphor, onomatopoeia. What are you thinking? All right, so hopefully you saw this was a metaphor. It's comparing strength and stranger. If she said your strength was like a stranger, then it would be a simile. But your strength was a stranger is a metaphor. And I really like metaphors because, again, you're taking that leap and saying something is or was something. So you go ahead and turn to your elbow partner and give your interpretation of this line. And feel free to look at the lines around it to help get that interpretation. But what does she mean by your strength was a stranger I could never touch? Have that conversation. And start to wind your conversations down. And I wish I said this earlier, but if you ever need to pause this, if your conversation is going longer, totally fine. I love that. So if you need to pause it, keep going. Otherwise, I'm going to give you my interpretation again with the disclaimer. I don't have an answer here for you. It's just kind of whatever you're thinking about it. So, your strength was a stranger I could never touch. Well, your strength, the father's strength, and was a stranger. So the father's very distant and could never touch. So it makes me think that this father had to be strong for his family, but by being strong for his family, it made him kind of emotionally cold. So he did these things he had to do. He made a living. He helped build a better life for his family. But by doing that, it sort of pushed the family away and made him kind of more and more foreign to his own family because he had to have this strength that the daughter couldn't quite understand. And so that's how I interpret that line. My interpretation is no better than yours. Okay, so that is what I have for you today. I just wanted to kind of go over some figurative language and review some of those devices, just because you keep telling me that you know how to use them and you know how to identify them, but I'm not seeing it in your writing. And as you create your slam poem this week, this learning target has to pop up. You need to have figurative language in your writing. So what you can do now, if you'd like to do some pre-writing before you get to write your poem, is you are more than welcome to go ahead and come up with maybe a simile, a metaphor, some sort of personification, some sort of onomatopoeia, some sort of hyperbole about the topic that you journaled about yesterday. Yesterday you journaled about a topic that you said was important to you, a social issue. Some of you wrote about homelessness, some wrote about bullying, racism, sexism, those types of things. Maybe you can create just a piece of figurative language in isolation that you could then apply to your poem. That's up to you. I'm not going to force you to do that, but if you want to try that, you're more than welcome to. You're also welcome to go back to our website now and take a look at any more of those slam poems that you weren't able to see. There's a whole bunch of links there. And then when you're done with that, I want you to make sure to get some free reading time. So make sure to go on to get free reading time if you didn't get that yet today. Thanks so much for trying out poetry. It's awesome. I can't thank you enough for trying it. I know a lot of students kind of shy away from it, so I think it's really bold and really powerful that you're trying it, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to write. And starting tomorrow, we're going to get you writing some poetry. All right, hope you enjoyed this second flipped video. Hopefully it works. If not, I'm going to re-record it, but I'm hoping this is the only one. All right.